Wild Eden. The next day after our return from the trip above the cloud dome, and our astonishing reception, you will, of course, understand the sense in which I use the term day. Edmund sprang another surprise upon us. "I have persuaded Allah," he said, "to make a trip in the car." "You don't mean it?" "Oh, yes, and I am sure she will be delighted." "But she is not going alone?" "Surely no, she will be accompanied by one of her women and by Ingra." "Ingra?" "Of course. Did you suppose that he would consent to be left behind? Allah herself would refuse to go without him." "Then," I said, with deep disappointment, "he has resumed all his influence over her." "I'm not sure he ever lost it," returned Edmund. "You forget his rank, and his position as her destined consort. Whatever we do, we have got to count him in." Jack raged inwardly, but said nothing. For my part, I almost wished Jack's bullet had not gone astray at that first memorable shooting. "Now," Edmund continued, "the car, as you know, has but a limited amount of room. I do not wish to crowd it uncomfortably, but I can take 6 persons. Allah's party comprises 3, so there is room for just 2 besides myself. You will have to draw lots." "Is Juba included in the drawing?" "Yes, and I'm half inclined to take him anyway, and let you 3 draw for the one place remaining." "You can count me out," said Henry. "If there is another to stay with me." "I prefer to remain." "Very well," said Edmund, "then Peter and Jack can draw lots." "Since we can't all go," said Jack, "and since that fellow is to be of the party, I'll stay with Henry." So it was settled without an appeal to chance, and I went with Edmund and Juba. As usual, Edmund immediately put his project into execution. It showed an astonishing confidence in us that Allah should consent to make such a trip, and that her people, and especially Ingra, should assent to it, and I could not sufficiently wonder at the fact. But we were now at the summit of favor and influence, and it is impossible to guess what thoughts may have been in their minds. At any rate, it showed how completely Edmund had established himself in Allah's esteem, and I suspect that her woman's curiosity had played a large part in the decision. There was another thing which astonished me yet more, and, in fact, awakened a good deal of apprehension in my mind. I could not but wonder that Edmund, after all the precautions that he had previously taken, should now think of admitting these people into the car, where they could witness his manipulations of the mechanism. I spoke to him about it. "Rest your mind easy about that," he said. "Now that everything goes like a charm, they will suspect nothing. It will be all a complete mystery to them. Even the gods used natural agencies when they visited the earth without shaking the belief of mankind in them. I employ no force of which they have the least idea, and if they see me touch a button, or pull a knob, what can that convey to their minds except an impression of mysterious power?" I said no more, but I was not convinced, and the sequel proved that, for once, Edmund had made a serious mistake, the more amazing because he had been the first to detect the exceptional intelligence and shrewdness of Ingra. But, no doubt, in the exultation of his recent triumph, he counted upon the strength of the superstitious regard in which we were held. Our departure from the tower was the signal for the assembling of great crowds of spectators again, and we sailed away with the utmost éclat. Allah at once showed all the eager excitement of a child over so novel and enjoyable an experience. The motion of the car was entirely unlike that of the airships. Perfectly steady, it skimmed along at a speed which filled her with amazement and delight. The city, with its towers, seemed to fly away from us by magic, and the trees and fields beneath ran into streaming lines. The windows were thrown wide open, and all stood by them, watching the scene. Finally Allah wished to go out on the window ledges, or one was perfectly secure if he kept a firm hold on the supports. Edmund was most of the time with us outside, only stepping within when he wished to change the course. I thought that he showed a disposition to conceal his manipulations as much as possible, as if what I had said had made an impression. But all were so much occupied with their novel sensations that, for the time at least, there was no danger of their taking note of anything else. I believe that it must have been some intimation from Allah which finally led Edmund to hold his course toward the mountains, but in a direction different from that which led to the mines. When he had once chosen this direction, he worked up the speed to fully 100 miles an hour, and all were compelled to go inside on account of the wind created by our rush through the air. We held on thus for 5 hours. During this time Edmund spread a repast made up of dishes chosen from the supplies in the car, and, of course, utterly strange to our guests. They found them to their taste, however, and were delighted with Edmund's entertainment. We spent a long time at our little table, and I was surprised at the variety of delicious things which Edmund managed to extract from his stores. There was even some champagne, and I noticed that Edmund urged it upon Ingra, who, nothing loath, drank enough to make him decidedly tipsy, a fact which was not surprising since we had found that the wines of Venus were very light, and but slightly alcoholized. At length we began to approach what proved to be the goal of our journey. Before us spread a vast extent of forest composed of trees of the most beautiful forms and foliage. Some towered up to a great height, spreading their pendulous branches over the less aspiring forms, like New England elms. Others were low and bushy, and afire with scarlet blossoms, whose perfume filled the air. A few resembled gigantic grasses or great timothy stems, surmounted with nodding plumes of golden leaves, streaming out like gilt gonfalons in the breeze. But there was one species, as tall and massive as oaks, and scattered everywhere through the forest, that I could liken to nothing but enormous rose bushes in the full bloom of June. When we began to pass above this strange woodland, Alabama made some communication to Edmund which caused him to slow down the movement of the car. By almost imperceptible touches he controlled the motive power, and presently we came to rest above a delightful glade, where a small stream ran at the foot of a gravelly slope, crowned with grass and overhung by trees. Here the car was allowed to settle gently upon the ground, and all alighted. Ingra, over whom the influence of the champagne had been growing, tottered on his legs in a way that would have filled Jack with uncontrollable delight, but Edmund gravely helped him out of the car and steadied him to a seat on the soft turf under the tree. I saw Allah regarding Ingra with a puzzled look, and no wonder, for Edmund had been careful that no one else should take enough of the wine to produce more than the slightest exhilaration of spirits. It is possible that Edmund had plied Ingra with the idea of rendering him less observant, and it probably had that effect, but it resulted, as you will see presently, in a revelation which finally put Edmund on guard against the very danger to which he had seemed so insensible when I mentioned it to him before our start. The place where we now were was, beyond comparison, the most charming that we had yet seen. A very Eden it seemed, wild, splendid, and remote from all cultivation. The air was loaded with indescribable fragrance shed from the thousands of strange blossoms that depended from trees and shrubs, and starred the rich grass. I learned afterwards from Edmund, who had it from Allah, that the spot was famous for its beauty and other attractions, and was sometimes visited in airships from the capital. But for them, what took us but a few hours was a trip extending over several days of time. One would have said that the forest was embedded in a garden of the most extraordinary orchids. The shapes of some of the flowers were so fantastic that it seemed impossible that nature could have produced them. And their colors were no less unparalleled, inimitable, and incredible.